Do you hear the occasional bump in the night? Does that odd scratching sound keep you awake wondering what it might be? If so, count yourself lucky that you're not among the Bell family of Robertson County, Tennessee. Our story begins early in the 19th century in what is known now as Adams, Tennessee. The small, sleepy little village in Robertson County is home to one of Central America's most famous ghost stories in the Bell Witch. At the turn of the 19th century, the Bell family moved to the area formerly known as the Red River Bottomlands in order to farm. Little did they know that just a few years later they would regret this decision. John Bell Sr. was wealthy and successful as a farmer, and eventually owned over 300 acres of land around his new home. He was well liked and well respected by the local community, even rising to the rank of elder of the Red River Baptist Church. He and his wife Lucy and their 5 children, Esther, John Jr., Betsy, Richard and Joelle, lived a happy and simple life. That was until the summer of 1817. While John Sr. was out surveying one of his fields, he saw a rather unusual animal, with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. The apparition disappeared and John quickly dismissed it and returned home thinking nothing more of it. That night, however, and for several nights afterwards, loud banging could be heard from outside the house, but no source could ever be found. Activity swiftly moved inside the house and increased in severity as it began to affect several family members. At first, loud knocking and scratching sounds could be heard throughout the house, and the sound of rats gnawing at the children's bedposts. Eventually, the children's bedclothes and pillows were forcibly pulled from their beds while they slept. Activity mainly centered around John and his daughter Betsy, particularly after she became engaged to one of the local boys. The activities of the entity eventually grew more and more extreme, especially when directed towards Betsy, and included feeling her hair being pulled, pinching, being pricked with sharp pins, and slaps to Betsy's face and stomach that would often result in large, hand-shaped welts. It was during this period that the entity developed a voice, at first just faint whispers that were barely audible, but eventually developing into full speech, particularly hymns and quotes from scriptures, and it is said that it was able to hold full, coherent conversations. The entity even named itself Kate, and was said to react positively to the use of this name. The spirit had an intense hatred for John Sr., and often declared its intention to kill, Old Jack as it would call him, with hexes and curses. Poltergeist was also demonstrating the ability to gain access to information that it had no way of knowing. One time the entity recited word for word 2 different sermons that were being given at the exact same time, 13 miles apart. Another time, as a guest from England visited the house, the witch was able to mimic the man's parents' voices and accents, waking him up early in the morning to the sound of his own parents worrying about him thousands of miles away. In contrast, John's wife Lucy was treated almost completely the opposite way by the entity, almost as if the entity was quite fond of her. The spirit is quoted as referring to Lucy as the most perfect woman to ever walk the earth. John Jr. too had a strange relationship with this spectre, and often conversed with it about such deep and diverse topics as the origins of life in Christianity, particularly the lack of faith in the world. Although originally John Sr. tried to keep the secret of his family's turmoil to himself for fear of judgment, eventually he found it necessary to confide in his neighbour and close friend James Johnson. Johnson and his wife, while skeptical, decided to stay in the house, and they too experienced similar otherworldly and aggressive issues as the Bell family did themselves. Our story reaches its crescendo as John's health begins to falter from the early 1820s onwards. He had developed strange facial tics and an incredibly difficult time swallowing. By autumn of that year, John's ill health had confined John to his house. On the rare occasions the sick man felt well enough to leave his home, the entity would slap him across his face and forcibly remove his shoes. In mid-1821, Betsy decided to call off her engagement to her love, as she could no longer take the stresses of this haunting and her love life. It is during this period in time that the witch seemed to ease off for a short period, seemingly happy to have cost Betsy her wedding and her future. John passed away in December 1821, the witch quickly claiming credit for the demise of the poor man, when an unidentified bottle was found in a nearby cupboard. The entity is quoted as telling the family, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him." The family gave a small amount of the liquid inside to their pet cat, which immediately passed away. John Jr. then threw the bottle in the fire and a gush of blue flame erupted in the fireplace. John's funeral was very well attended by the local community, being as he was so well liked and respected, and also because of a morbid curiosity about the witch. Several accounts of the funeral say that the witch could be heard singing drinking songs in the graveyard in celebration and jeering at the mourners gathered there. It is said the singing and laughing continued until the very last person left the cemetery. After John's funeral, the witch declared to the family that it would now leave them be, apparently successful in its mission to get rid of the family patriarch, but left with a chilling warning that said it would return in 7 years. True to its word, in 1828, the entity did return and resumed several of the activities that it had used to plague the Bell family in the years prior. Luckily though, this second haunting was short-lived, mainly due to Lucy and her children's unwillingness to acknowledge the entity and its torments. In its final act on the Bell family in 1828, it declared that it would return to a member of this particular family in 107 years. In 1935, Charles Bailey Bell, grandson of John Bell Jr., actually wrote a book about his family's experiences with the Bell Witch, mainly recanting the tales told to him by his great-aunt Betsy. Whether or not the entity ever returned to him, in particular, we do not know. Other small acts have been reported and attributed to the Bell Witch too, since then. In 1937, the owners of the land that were on the Bell farm reported hearing sounds coming from what is now known as the Bell Witch Caves. The Bell Witch Caves are a small cave system on the property. The sound that was described was something rubbing against paper and children's laughter, and continued over the course of the next 80 years. Small, strange quirks have been attributed to the witch, but no solid evidence has ever been put forward. Even to this day, the Bell Witch has been blamed for the strange going on in the area, such as sounds of children singing faintly or candlelights flickering through the fields. In conclusion, the problem with making a judgment on a case such as this is the amount of time that has gone by. Eyewitnesses to these events are now long dead, and although there are many written records, books, and magazine pieces written about the Bell Witch, sorting fact from fiction is almost impossible. General consensus is mixed as to what could have caused such events, whether it was truly an otherworldly entity, a real witch, a fanciful story, or a poisoning, we're not sure. The jury is also out when it comes to the matter of how many of the acts described actually happened and how much of it is just convenient storytelling. One thing is universally agreed upon, and that is that there's definitely something very wrong in those parts in the 1800s. Believe it or not, that's up to you, but we can all agree it's grim and it's ghoulish. Good night.